The morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of Willowbrook Country Club as I adjusted my son Thomas's boutonniere. My hands, weathered from decades in construction, trembled slightly, not from age but from the weight of what I knew. Madison, my son's bride, caught my eye from across the room. Her smile seemed perfect, practiced. She glided over in her wedding dress, pulled me aside behind a marble column, and pressed close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. Her whisper turned my blood cold. "Buy us a house, Harold. $500,000. Or I'll tell everyone you've been touching me. I'll say I'm pregnant with your child." My hand moved instinctively to my jacket pocket fingers, finding the small recording device my lawyer had insisted I carry. The path to this moment had started 8 months earlier, though I suppose the real story begins with understanding my son Thomas. At 32, he remained the bright-eyed boy who'd once built elaborate Lego cities in our living room, explaining each building's purpose with infectious enthusiasm. After my wife Margaret passed from cancer 15 years ago, Thomas became my anchor. We grieved together, healed together, and built our lives around the gap her absence created. Thomas had inherited his mother's brilliant mind and gentle heart. Stanford University embraced him with open arms, and he graduated summa cum laude with a computer science degree. Silicon Valley tech companies fought over him, but he chose a mid-sized firm where he could make a real difference developing software that helped small businesses compete with corporate giants. His success made me proud, but his kindness made me prouder. He volunteered at coding camps for underprivileged kids and never forgot to call on Sunday evenings, no matter how busy his week had been. The construction business I'd built from nothing had taught me to read people like blueprints. 40 years of dealing with contractors, suppliers, and clients had honed my instincts sharp as any tool in my workshop. When Thomas first brought Madison Taylor to dinner at my house, those instincts immediately started firing warning signals. She was stunning, I'll give her that. Blonde hair that caught light like spun gold-green eyes that seemed to shift shade with her mood, and a laugh that could fill a room. But something in how she catalogued my home bothered me. Her eyes lingered too long on the artwork, the furniture, the framed photograph of the commercial complex that had made my fortune. She asked questions about Margaret's jewelry still kept in the safe, claiming she was interested in vintage pieces. "Your father has built quite an empire," Madison had said to Thomas that first night, her hand possessively on his arm. The word choice struck me as odd. Empire. Not business, not company, but empire. Like something to be conquered. Over the following weeks, I watched Madison work. She had a gift for making Thomas feel like the center of the universe. She laughed at his coding jokes, attended his volleyball games, and somehow always needed his help with something that made him feel strong and capable. Classic love bombing, though I didn't know the term then. My concerns deepened when I ran into Carl Morrison at the hardware store. Carl had been a detective with the local police force for 30 years before retiring, and we'd known each other since our kids played Little League together. He pulled me aside between the lumber aisles, his expression serious. "Harold, I need to tell you something, but it's off the record," Carl had said, glancing around the empty aisle. "That girl your boy's dating, Madison Taylor. I recognized her from some old case files. She's been married before. Twice. Both men were wealthy elderly, and both died within 2 years of marriage." My stomach had dropped. "Are you saying she killed them?" Carl shook his head. "No evidence for that. First one had a heart attack, second fell downstairs. But there were investigations. Insurance companies asking questions. Nothing stuck, but Harold?" He gripped my shoulder. "Watch your boy. Watch yourself." I'd tried approaching Thomas delicately. Over lunch at his favorite barbecue place, I mentioned hearing Madison had been married before, wondering why she hadn't mentioned it. Thomas's reaction shocked me. His face flushed red, and he slammed his sweet tea on the table hard enough to splash ice. "I cannot believe you're doing this." he'd said, voice rising enough that other diners turned to stare. Madison warned me you might get jealous. She said single fathers sometimes can't let go. Thomas, I'm not jealous. I'm concerned. She's been married twice before, and both men... Stop! He'd stood up, throwing cash on the table. Madison told me about her past. Her first husband was her high school sweetheart who died in military service. The second was an arranged marriage her family pushed, and he was abusive. She got out when he died in an accident. How dare you try to make her a victim into something sinister? Neither story matched what Carl had told me, but Thomas stormed out before I could explain. That night, Madison called me directly, crying softly into the phone. I know what you think of me, Harold. She'd sobbed. I should have been more open about my past, but it's so painful. I just wanted a fresh start with Thomas. I thought you'd understand about losing someone you love. Her manipulation was masterful. By invoking Margaret, she'd found my weakness, but her performance confirmed my suspicions. No truly grieving person weaponizes another's loss so smoothly. Within a week, Thomas had moved into Madison's apartment. Our Sunday calls became sporadic, then stopped. When we did talk, Madison always seemed to be there, her voice in the background, coaching his responses. My son was slipping away, and every attempt to reach him only pushed him further into her web. That's when I hired Janet Stone. Robert Fitzgerald, my attorney for 20 years, had recommended her as the best private investigator in the state. Janet was a former FBI agent who'd specialized in financial crimes before going private. She took the case immediately after I explained the situation. Men like your son are prime targets, Janet had explained during our first meeting. Successful trusting limited relationship experience. Con artists look for people who've had stable, loving backgrounds because they don't recognize manipulation tactics. 3 weeks later, Janet delivered her preliminary report. Madison Taylor was actually Margaret Ann Stilton, and her history was far darker than even Carl had known. She'd been investigated for elder abuse in Nevada, insurance fraud in Arizona, and identity theft in New Mexico. Each time she'd slipped away before charges could stick, moving to a new state, with a new name and a new story. She's part of a network, Janet had explained, showing me surveillance photos. This man here, he poses as her brother, cousin, friend, whatever the con requires. They've been working together for at least 7 years. I'd tried one more time to show Thomas the evidence. I'd invited him to lunch, just the two of us, printing out everything Janet had found. But when Thomas arrived, Madison was with him. She'd looked at the folder in my hands and started crying immediately. I knew you'd do this, she'd wailed, clinging to Thomas. Your father's having me investigated, Thomas. I told you he was trying to break us up. He probably fabricated all of this. Thomas hadn't even looked at the evidence. He'd wrapped his arm around Madison and fixed me with a look I'd never seen from him before. Pure disappointment. I'm done, Dad, he'd said quietly. Madison and I are getting married with or without your blessing. When you're ready to apologize and accept the woman I love, you know where to find us. They'd left me sitting there with my folder of truth that might as well have been blank pages. That night I'd sat in Margaret's garden talking to her memory like I did when life got too heavy. What would you do, Maggie? I'd whispered to the roses she'd planted. How do I save our boy when he doesn't want to be saved? The answer came not in words, but in a memory. Margaret facing down a shady contractor who'd tried to overcharge us for our first home renovation. She'd smiled sweetly, let him think he was winning, then produced the recorded conversation where he'd admitted to inflating prices. Sometimes, she'd said afterward, you have to let people show their true colors, but always be ready to prove it. The next day, I visited Robert's office. We put new protections in place, updated my will, created an ironclad trust, and most importantly, Robert suggested the recording device. Georgia's a one-party consent state, he'd explained. You can record any conversation you're part of. Given what this woman's already shown, you need protection. I started carrying the device everywhere, a small insurance policy in my pocket. I also installed security cameras throughout my house hidden carefully in smoke detectors and picture frames. If Madison was going to make a move against me, I'd be ready. The engagement happened fast. Thomas proposed after just 6 months together, and Madison immediately threw herself into wedding planning. The event grew more elaborate and expensive with each passing week. What started as a simple ceremony ballooned into a 300-guest spectacle at Willowbrook Country Club. I watched from the sidelines as Madison systematically isolated Thomas from his friends. She'd create conflicts that forced him to choose between them and her. She always won. His volleyball team, his college buddies, his coding mentor, one by one, they all faded away, replaced by Madison's circle of equally predatory friends. My housekeeper, Rosa, who'd worked for my family 20 years, became my unexpected ally. She'd overheard phone conversations, seen documents left carelessly on Madison's visits. One evening, as she prepared to leave, Rosa pulled me aside. "Mr. Harold," she said in her careful English, "that woman, she is not good. I hear her on the phone talking about your money. She tells someone you are easier target than she thought." I'd hugged Rosa, then this loyal woman who'd helped raise Thomas after Margaret died. "I know, Rosa. I'm trying to protect him." "You are good father," she'd said firmly. "Thomas will see truth. Children always come home when the storm passes." But as I stood in that country club, Madison's threat still echoing in my ears, I wondered if Rosa was right. Would Thomas ever come home? Or would I lose him forever to save him? My fingers tightened on the recorder in my pocket. 40 years of building, of creating something from nothing, of fighting for every contract and every success. And it all came down to this moment. A different kind of construction project. Not building something new, but tearing down a carefully crafted lie before it could destroy my family. 3 months before the wedding, Madison's campaign intensified. She'd moved from subtle manipulation to outright financial predation, though she maintained her sweet facade perfectly. I watched helplessly as she convinced Thomas to add her name to his investment accounts, spinning a story about building their future together. "Sweetheart," I'd overheard her saying during one of their visits to my house. "It just makes sense for planning. What if something happens to you? How would I pay for the funeral you'd want? It's really about protecting each other." The words chilled me. She was already thinking about his death, planting seeds. Thomas, still blind to her true nature, had agreed immediately. Within a week, she had access to over $200,000 of his savings. Money he'd worked 60-hour weeks to accumulate vanished into joint accounts faster than I could document it. Madison began appearing at Chamber of Commerce meetings, introducing herself as my future daughter-in-law. She'd corner my business associates, asking innocent-seeming questions about construction costs, profit margins, and property values. George Mitchell, who'd been my partner in several major developments, called me after one such encounter. "Harold, that girl grilled me for an hour about our plaza project," George had said. "Wanted to know exact figures, investor names, timeline for selling. Felt like I was being deposed by a lawyer, not chatting at a social event." Her intelligence gathering extended beyond business. She befriended the wives of my associates, joining their book clubs and charity committees. Within weeks, she knew who was getting divorced, who had health problems, who had vulnerable elderly parents. She was building a database of potential victims, I realized, and using my reputation as entry. The security cameras I'd installed proved their worth one Thursday evening. Thomas and Madison came for dinner, and halfway through the meal, Thomas received an emergency call from work. A server crash required his immediate attention. He apologized profusely, kissing Madison before rushing out. She assured him she'd wait at my house, help me clean up. The moment his car left the driveway, Madison transformed. Her shoulders relaxed, her smile sharpened, and she looked at me like a cat who'd cornered a mouse. She helped clear the table, following me to the kitchen, then pressed against the counter in a way that made her intentions clear. "You know, Harold," she said, voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Thomas is sweet, but he's just a boy. I've always been attracted to men with experience, men who've built things with their own hands." I stepped back, maintaining distance while staying in camera range. "Madison, you're engaged to my son." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Engaged, married, these are just words. What matters is connection. Chemistry." She moved closer. "I could make you very happy, Harold. Happier than you've been since Margaret died. All I ask is that you're generous with us. The house we want may be a little investment in my business ideas." "What business ideas?" I asked, buying time, making sure the camera captured everything. "Oh, I have so many plans," she continued, running a finger along the granite countertop. "Interior design, maybe, or event planning. I just need startup capital, say $500,000. That's nothing to you." "I think you should go," I said firmly. Her expression flickered, mask slipping for just a moment to reveal something ugly underneath. Then she smiled again, sweeter than ever. "Of course, I understand. You need time to think about it. But Harold..." She paused at the kitchen door. "Thomas doesn't have to know about this conversation, unless you make it necessary." The threat was subtle, but clear. After she left, I immediately backed up the footage to multiple locations and sent a copy to Robert. This was escalating faster than I'd anticipated. Over the next few weeks, Madison began her whisper campaign against me. She told Thomas I'd been acting strangely, forgetting things, seeming confused. She suggested maybe I was showing early signs of dementia like her poor grandfather had. "I'm worried about your dad," I heard her tell Thomas during one visit. "He called me Margaret yesterday, and he keeps talking about people who aren't there. Maybe we should look into assisted living options. Somewhere he'll be safe." Thomas, bless his trusting heart, defended me. "Dad's mind is sharp as ever. He probably just misspoke." But Madison was patient. She kept planting seeds, and I could see Thomas starting to watch me differently, looking for signs of decline that didn't exist. It was masterful gaslighting, making him question reality itself. Rosa became even more vital during this period. Her presence in my home meant Madison couldn't plant evidence or create scenarios without witnesses. One afternoon, Rosa overheard a particularly damning conversation. Madison had been on the phone in the guest bathroom, thinking she was alone. Rosa, cleaning the adjacent bedroom, heard everything through the thin walls. "The old man's worth at least $50 million, Madison had said. "The construction business alone is valued at 30, plus the properties, the investments. If we play this right, we'll have access to everything within 2 years, either through the son or directly through him if I can work it right." There was a pause. Then Madison laughed. "No, Brad, not like Phoenix. This one's smarter. We need to be more careful. But the payoff will set us up for life." Rosa had written down every word, her careful handwriting documenting the conversation. When she showed me, I knew we were dealing with something bigger than just Madison. Brad was clearly the partner Janet had identified, and Phoenix must have been one of their previous victims. I increased my security measures, installing cameras in my office and car. I also started carrying a second recorder as backup, and made sure my phone was always charged and ready to record video. Paranoid, maybe. But as the saying goes, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. The wedding planning became Madison's weapon for further isolation. She scheduled vendor meetings during Thomas's work hours, then complained he wasn't involved. She picked fights about guest lists, insisting his friends were trying to sabotage their happiness. The few who made it onto the invitation list received theirs late with wrong dates or venues, ensuring they couldn't attend. My own invitation arrived 2 weeks before the wedding, handed to me by Madison personally during one of their visits. The envelope was expensive, the calligraphy perfect, but the message was clear. I was just another guest, not the father of the groom. "We want you there, of course," Madison had said, watching my face as I opened it. But Thomas and I decided to keep things simple. No special roles or speeches, just a modern, streamlined ceremony. Translation: I was being relegated to the sidelines of my own son's wedding. Thomas looked uncomfortable, but didn't contradict her. Another victory for Madison. Another brick in the wall between my son and me. As the wedding approached, I met regularly with Janet to review her findings. The deeper she dug, the darker the picture became. Madison and Brad had left a trail of destruction across the country. Elderly victims, broken families, depleted bank accounts, and at least 2 suspicious deaths. She's escalating, Janet warned during our final meeting before the wedding. The pattern shows increasing boldness with each con, this one targeting someone your son's age, marrying into a family with substantial wealth. It's her biggest play yet. What can we do? I asked, frustration boiling over. I've tried everything to warn Thomas. Janet leaned back, considering. Sometimes, Harold, you can't prevent someone from walking into a trap. All you can do is be ready to spring it shut on the trapper instead of the trapped. Her words echoed Margaret's philosophy. Let them show their true colors, but be ready to prove it. I was as ready as I could be, but the stakes kept rising. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about saving my son's life. The rehearsal dinner loomed one last chance before the wedding to possibly reach Thomas. I'd prepared carefully, gathering the most damning evidence into a single folder. If I could just get him alone, make him look at the facts without Madison's interference, maybe there was hope. But Madison was too smart to leave anything to chance. She'd planned the rehearsal dinner like a military campaign, ensuring I'd never get a moment alone with my son. The seating chart placed me at a distant table with elderly relatives I barely knew, while she and Thomas held court at the head table with her carefully selected inner circle. As I watched them that night, Madison glowing with triumph, while my son gazed at her adoringly, I felt the weight of impending disaster. In less than 24 hours, she'd legally be his wife, with access to everything he'd built and everything he might inherit. The recording in my pocket felt heavier than ever, a small weapon against an enormous threat. But I'd learned something important from 40 years in construction. Sometimes the smallest tool used at exactly the right moment can bring down the biggest structure. Madison had built her con carefully, but every structure has a weak point. I just had to find it and be ready to strike when she least expected it. The Sterling Room at Willowbrook Country Club glittered with candlelight and crystal as guests arrived for the rehearsal dinner. Madison had orchestrated every detail to perfection, from the orchid centerpieces to the string quartet playing softly in the corner. Looking at the scene, no one would guess the darkness lurking beneath the elegant surface. I'd arrived early hoping to catch Thomas alone, but Madison had anticipated that move. She'd stationed her bridesmaids like sentries, each one intercepting me with breathless chatter about wedding preparations whenever I approached my son. These women, I'd learned from Janet's research, weren't old friends from college, as Madison claimed. They were part of her network, each with their own questionable past. The dinner progressed with choreographed precision. Madison held court at the main table, regaling guests with the story of how she and Thomas met, a complete fabrication involving a charity event that never happened. I sat at table 12 with Thomas's great-aunt Ethel and second cousins from Portland, effectively exiled from the inner circle. George Mitchell found me during the cocktail hour, pulling me aside near the terrace doors. His usually jovial face was creased with concern. "Harold, I need to tell you something," he said, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. Madison cornered me at the bar. She's had quite a bit of champagne, and she started talking about her plans. My pulse quickened. "What kind of plans?" "She mentioned you're going to be signing over some properties to them as a wedding gift. Said something about it being better for tax purposes if you do it before you get too old to make financial decisions. Harold, she actually used the word inheritance in present tense like it was already hers. The boldness of it stunned even me. She was already counting my money, planning my incapacity, or worse. I thanked George and made a mental note to ensure all my property transfers required multiple witnesses and video confirmation. As dinner was served, I noticed Madison's brother Brad for the first time. He'd stayed in the background during previous encounters, but tonight he was working the room like a professional. I watched him charm the wives, joke with the husbands, and carefully extract information from everyone he met. His questions seemed casual, but targeted investment strategies, vacation home locations, family dynamics. During the main course, Brad approached my table. Up close, I could see the calculation behind his friendly smile. He was handsome in a rough way, with scarred knuckles that spoke of violence despite his expensive suit. "You must be so proud of Thomas," he said, pulling up an empty chair without invitation. "Madison tells me you built your company from nothing. That takes real guts." "It takes hard work," I replied carefully. "And smarts," Brad added, leaning closer. "Knowing when to take risks, when to fold. Madison says you're thinking of retiring soon, letting the next generation take over." "Madison says a lot of things." His smile tightened. "She's just concerned about you. Wants to make sure you're taken care of. Family should look after family, right?" The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. I excused myself and headed for the restroom, needing space to think. In the hallway, I nearly collided with Janet Stone. My investigator had dressed as catering staff, blending seamlessly with the servers. "We need to talk," she whispered, guiding me into an empty conference room. "I've been monitoring their communications. Madison just got a text from someone named Marcus. He's in Phoenix and he's angry. Wants his cut from the last job or he's coming here." "Forkum." Marcus. The name rang a bell. Wait, her second husband was named Marcus Whitfield. Janet nodded grimly. "The one who supposedly died. He's very much alive and apparently was part of their crew until they cut him out. Harold, this is bigger than we thought. If Marcus shows up tomorrow and causes a scene, it could expose everything." I finished. But would Thomas believe it even then? Or would Madison spin another story about a deranged ex? We were interrupted by a knock. Robert Fitzgerald entered, looking unusually formal in his tuxedo. "Harold, we have a problem," my lawyer said. "I just got a call from a colleague. Madison's been making inquiries about power of attorney, specifically how to get it over a parent-in-law who's showing signs of dementia." The pieces clicked into place. The comments about my confusion, the staged incidents, the concerned act she was building a case for my incompetence. Once married to Thomas, she'd push for control of my assets under the guise of family care. "There's more," Janet added. "I've found the smoking gun, but it's complicated." She pulled out her phone, showing me a marriage certificate from Arizona. Madison Taylor to Marcus Whitfield, dated 3 years ago. No divorce decree existed in any state. "She's still married," I breathed. "The wedding tomorrow would be bigamy." "Exactly," Robert said. "But here's the complication. If we reveal this now publicly, Madison might claim ignorance. Say she thought the divorce was final. She could postpone the wedding, fix the paperwork, and continue the con." Janet picked up the thread. "Or worse, she could accelerate her backup plan, the one where something happens to you before anyone can investigate further." We strategized quickly. The evidence needed to be presented in a way that prevented Madison from spinning it or escaping. We needed her to incriminate herself beyond any doubt in front of witnesses who couldn't be dismissed or discredited. Returning to the dinner, I found the atmosphere had shifted. Madison was louder, her laughter sharp and brittle. She'd been drinking heavily and her mask was slipping. Thomas looked uncomfortable occasionally, whispering to her, trying to moderate her behavior. During the dessert course, Madison stood to give a toast. Her words started sweet enough, thanking everyone for coming, praising Thomas. Then she turned to me, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "And to Harold," she said, raising her champagne with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you for raising such a wonderful son. I promise to take good care of him. And don't worry, we'll take good care of you too when the time comes." The implication hung heavy in the air. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Thomas's face flushed with embarrassment. But Madison wasn't done. After all, she continued, swaying slightly, family takes care of family, even when they get old and start forgetting things, even when they need help managing their affairs. That's what love means, right, Harold? The room fell silent. Everyone could hear the threat wrapped in false concern. Thomas stood gently taking the microphone from Madison, trying to salvage the moment with his own toast. But the damage was done. Seeds of doubt had been planted in many minds. After dinner, as guests mingled over coffee and liqueurs, I made one last attempt to reach Thomas. I found him on the terrace alone for once, staring out at the golf course under moonlight. "Son," I started, but he held up a hand. "I know what you're going to say, Dad. Madison had too much to drink. She's nervous about tomorrow. She didn't mean anything by it." "Thomas, please, just look at this one document." I pulled out the marriage certificate. "She's still married? The wedding tomorrow would be illegal." For a moment I saw doubt flicker in his eyes. He reached for the paper and my hope soared. Then Madison appeared, as if summoned by some dark magic. "There you are, sweetheart," she cooed, wrapping herself around Thomas's arm. She saw the document in my hand, and her eyes went hard. "What's this? More of your investigator's creative writing." "It's a legal document," I said firmly. "You're still married to Marcus Whitfield." Madison laughed a sound like shattering crystal. "Marcus, oh, Harold, you really did dig deep. Yes, I was married to Marcus. And yes, the divorce was messy, but it was finalized last year. I can show you the papers tomorrow if you'd like. Though it's sad you'd stoop to forging documents to stop our wedding. The gaslighting was masterful. She'd turned my evidence into an attack on my character." Thomas looked between us, confusion and pain warring on his face. "Dad," he said quietly, "please, just stop. If you can't be happy for me, at least don't try to ruin it." They walked away together, leaving me alone on the terrace with my useless proof. Inside, the party continued, but I'd lost my appetite for pretense. Tomorrow would bring either salvation or disaster, and everything hinged on being ready for whatever Madison planned next. As I drove home that night, I thought about Margaret again. What would she do in my place? The answer came clearly. She'd trust in truth and love. Truth might be twisted, and love might be blind. But in the end, they were stronger than any lie. I just had to survive long enough to prove it. Dawn broke gray and humid over Willowbrook Country Club, matching my mood as I dressed in my tuxedo. The morning news droned in the background while I adjusted my cufflinks Margaret's wedding gift to me 42 years ago. My phone had been silent all morning. No calls from Thomas, no last-minute reconciliation. The wedding would proceed as planned. I arrived at the club 3 hours before the ceremony, wanting to scout the terrain like I would a construction site. The transformation from last night's rehearsal dinner was complete. White roses and baby's breath adorned every surface and innocent facade over the corruption beneath. Madison had spared no expense with my son's money. Carl Morrison intercepted me near the entrance, dressed in a dark suit that couldn't quite hide his cop bearing. "Harold, we've got a situation. Those guests Madison invited, I ran their plates like you asked. We've got a rogues gallery here. 3 with fraud convictions, 2 with assault charges, and 1 who jumped bail in Nevada last month. Can you arrest them? Not without cause and warrants. But I've got some off-duty buddies here as backup. We're watching." He gripped my shoulder. "Your boy's lucky to have you. Most fathers would have given up by now." In the groom's preparation suite, I found Thomas alone for the first time in months, struggling with his bow tie in the mirror. For a moment, time reversed. He was 8 again, frustrated with his Little League uniform needing his dad's help. "Let me," I offered quietly. He nodded, and I stepped close, working the silk into a perfect bow. This close, I could see the strain around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. My son was having doubts. "You don't have to do this," I whispered. "It's not too late." His eyes met mine in the mirror. "Dad, But then the door burst open and Madison's bridesmaids flooded in, chattering about schedules and photos. The moment shattered. Harold. One of them, a sharp-faced woman named Veronica, smiled with too many teeth. "Madison needs to see you, privately, in the bridal suite." Every instinct screamed danger, but I went. The recording device in my pocket was running, and I'd sent Robert a text with my location. If Madison wanted a private conversation, I'd give her one she'd never forget. The bridal suite was a study in white satin and nervous energy. Madison had dismissed her attendants, standing alone by the window in her wedding dress. She looked beautiful, I had to admit, like an angel carved from ice. "Harold," she said without turning, "I wanted to give you one last chance. Transfer the Riverside properties to Thomas and me today, and I'll make sure your son stays happy. Fight me and things will get unpleasant." "Is that a threat?" She turned then, and her face was no longer beautiful. It was predatory, ancient, despite her youth. "It's a promise. You've been recording our conversations, haven't you?" "Very clever. But I've been busy too." She pulled out her phone, showing me a video. Security footage from somewhere grainy, but clear enough. It showed a man who looked like me entering a hotel room with a young woman who wasn't Madison. The timestamp was last month. "Amazing what technology can do," Madison continued. "Deepfakes are so convincing now. I have dozens of these. You at strip clubs with prostitutes, even one at what looks like a drug deal. Sure, experts might eventually prove they're fake, but by then your reputation would be destroyed. Thomas would be so disgusted he'd never speak to you again." The sophistication of her con took my breath away. But she'd made a mistake, gotten too confident. She thought she held all the cards. "So what happens now?" I asked, letting her think she'd won. "Now." Madison smiled. "Now you smile through this wedding? You give a touching toast about welcoming me to the family, and Monday morning we meet at your lawyer's office to start transferring assets. Or these videos go viral and your son learns what kind of man his father really is." She moved closer, her perfume cloying. "You know, Harold, this could have been pleasant. If you'd accepted my offer that night in your kitchen, we could have been partners. But you had to be noble. So now we do it the hard way. I need guarantees," I said, playing for time. "How do I know you won't release those videos anyway?" "Because I'm not stupid," she snapped. "I want access to your money, not a war. Play nice and Thomas never has to know how weak his father really is. Fight me and I'll destroy you both. Starting today." She pulled out a folder, revealing medical documents. Pregnancy tests. All positive, all dated from a month ago. My insurance policy. "If you make trouble at this wedding, I'll announce I'm carrying your grandchild. Then I'll cry and confess that it's actually yours. That you've been forcing yourself on me for months. I have witnesses who'll swear they saw you leaving my apartment at suspicious hours." My hand moved to my pocket, not for the recorder, but for my phone. One touch would call, Robert would summon help. But Madison saw the movement. "Go ahead," she taunted. "Call your lawyer, call the police. I'll start screaming. Who do you think they'll believe, the sweet pregnant bride or the controlling father who's been harassing the wedding couple for months?" The trap was elegant in its simplicity. But she'd gotten drunk on her own power, spending too long gloating. She didn't notice my phone had been recording video this entire time, capturing not just her words, but her transformation from bride to predator. "One more thing," Madison added, pulling me toward the door. "Brad and his associates will be watching you during the ceremony. Any deviation from the script, any attempt to warn Thomas or stop the wedding, and they'll handle it. You'd be surprised how many accidents can happen at a celebration. Champagne glasses break so easily against faces. Older men trip on stairs. Heart attacks are so common at your age. The naked threats should have terrified me. Instead, they filled me with cold resolve. She'd just confessed to conspiracy extortion and planned assault on camera. But I needed more. I needed her to hang herself completely. "I understand," I said quietly. You win." Her smile was triumphant. "I always do. Now get out. I have a wedding to finish preparing for. Oh, and Harold, smile. This is supposed to be a happy day." I left the bridal suite, my phone still recording. In the hallway, I immediately sent the video to Robert, Janet, and Carl, then uploaded it to 3 different cloud services. Whatever happened next, the evidence would survive. Guests were arriving in earnest now. I recognized most of Thomas's side good people from our community who'd watched him grow up. Madison's side was sparser, but more interesting. The criminals Carl had identified clustered together, eyeing the wealthy guests like wolves surveying sheep. Janet appeared at my elbow, dressed elegantly as a guest. "I saw your video," she whispered. "It's perfect. But Harold, there's been a development. Marcus Whitfield just checked into the Hampton Inn downtown. He'll be here within the hour." The chaos Madison had tried to prevent was coming anyway. I felt a grim satisfaction. She'd built her house of cards too high, and the wind was picking up. I took my place in the front row as music began to play. Thomas stood at the altar looking handsome, but troubled. His best man, one of the few college friends Madison hadn't driven away, kept whispering reassurances. The processional began, bridesmaids gliding down the aisle like sharks in silk. Then the music changed to the wedding march. The doors opened, and Madison appeared on Brad's arm. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, her partner in crime, literally giving her away to her latest mark. She looked radiant, every inch the perfect bride, unless you noticed how her eyes swept the room, cataloging exits and counting allies. As she passed my row, Madison paused infinitesimally, catching my eye. Her smile promised retribution if I stepped out of line. I smiled back, my hand in my pocket. Not reaching for the recorder this time, but for something else entirely. The ceremony began with the standard welcomes and readings. I barely heard them, focused on the phone vibrating in my pocket. Messages from Janet. "Marcus en route." "Brad's getting nervous." "State police on standby." Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The officiant's voice rang out clear and strong. "If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace." The silence stretched like a held breath. Madison's eyes bored into mine, daring me to break our deal. Thomas looked straight ahead, probably praying for the moment to pass. The guests shifted restlessly. I stood up. Madison's mask finally cracked, showing real fear. Brad started moving down the side aisle. The bridesmaids closed ranks. But I wasn't looking at any of them. I was looking at the man who'd just entered the back of the venue. Marcus Whitfield, very much alive, despite Madison's stories of his death, stood in a badly fitting suit with papers in his hand. "I object," I said clearly, my voice carrying through the space. "This wedding cannot proceed because the bride is already married." The eruption was immediate. Guests gasped. Thomas turned to stare at me in horror. Madison started to speak, probably to spin another lie. But I wasn't done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, holding it high. "And I have video proof of the bride attempting to extort me this morning. She threatened to falsely accuse me of assault if I didn't sign over my properties. She's been planning to steal everything my son and I have worked for." Madison's scream cut through the chaos. Not a denial or a plea, but pure rage. She lunged at me, trying to grab the phone. But Carl and his off-duty officers were already moving badges out, blocking her path. "That's not all," Marcus Whitfield called from the back, walking forward with his papers raised. "Madison Taylor, or should I say Margaret Stilton, or whoever you're calling yourself today, you're still married to me. And I want my cut from the Phoenix job, or I'm telling everything to the FBI." The wedding dissolved into chaos. Brad tried to run, but found the exits blocked by Carl's people. The criminal guests scattered like roaches when the lights come on. Madison's bridesmaids revealed their true nature, cursing and fighting as they were detained. But in the center of it all, my son stood frozen at the altar, his world collapsing around him. I pushed through the crowd to reach him, catching him as his knees buckled. "I'm sorry," I whispered, holding him as he shook. "I'm so sorry, son, but I couldn't let her destroy you." Madison was still screaming as the police led her away, her white dress trailing on the ground like broken wings. The last thing she shrieked before the doors closed was aimed at me. "You'll pay for this, I'll destroy you." But she was wrong. She'd destroyed herself the moment she'd decided my family was an easy mark. The construction business had taught me that foundations built on lies always crumble. Today, Madison had learned that lesson too. The country club's ballroom erupted into pandemonium as Madison's carefully crafted world imploded. Wedding guests pressed against the windows, watching police cars fill the circular drive. Thomas stood frozen at the altar, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and devastating hurt. I kept my arm around him, feeling him tremble as we watched his fiancée transform into a cornered animal. "This is all lies!" Madison screamed, as officers approached with handcuffs. Her wedding dress caught on a chair, tearing with a sound like ripping paper. "Harold set me up. He's trying to control his son Thomas. Baby, don't let them do this." But her desperate performance fell flat as Marcus Whitfield strode forward, waving his marriage certificate. "Save it, Maggie, or Madison, or whatever you're calling yourself these days." He turned to the nearest officer. "I've got 3 years of evidence on my laptop. The Phoenix job, the Henderson con, all of it. I want immunity, and I'll give you everything." Brad made his move, then shoving past elderly Aunt Ethel and sprinting for the service exit. He'd calculated wrong. My construction crew had arrived early to help with cleanup, and these weren't soft-handed office workers. Big Jim Kowalski, my foreman for 20 years, caught Brad with a forearm that would have stopped a charging bull. Brad went down hard, his nose painting the white runner with red. "That's for threatening our boss," Jim growled, pinning Brad until police took over. The bridesmaids scattered like startled birds, but they'd underestimated Janet Stone's thoroughness. She'd positioned security at every exit, and one by one the accomplices were corralled. Veronica, the sharp-faced woman who'd summoned me to Madison's trap, tried to blend with legitimate guests until Janet personally zip-tied her hands. FBI. Patricia Coleman announced badge high as she entered with a team of federal agents. Madison's interstate crimes had triggered federal jurisdiction. "Everyone please remain calm and seated. We'll need statements from witnesses." Thomas finally spoke, his voice cracked and hollow. "Dad, is it true? Everything you tried to tell me?" I guided him to a chair, kneeling beside him. "I'm afraid so, son. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way." "The pregnancy papers," he said, suddenly eyes widening. "This morning she showed me pregnancy papers, said we were having a baby." Agent Coleman overheard and approached. "Mr. Harrison, those papers are evidence. Did she attempt to use them as leverage?" Thomas nodded numbly. Then his analytical mind kicked in. "Wait, the dates. She showed me tests dated last month, but we were careful, and the timing doesn't..." Understanding dawned horribly. She was going to fake a miscarriage, wasn't she? Use it to manipulate me. That appears to be one of her strategies. Coleman confirmed. "We've seen this pattern before. The fake pregnancy, the convenient loss, the grieving process that isolates the victim further. It's textbook emotional manipulation." Madison had been dragged to the lobby, still fighting and screaming. Through the glass doors, we could see her being read her rights. Her white dress was ruined makeup streaming down her face in black rivers. The mask hadn't just slipped, it had shattered entirely. George Mitchell approached, looking shaken but relieved. "Harold, I can't believe you stayed so calm through all this. When she threatened you this morning..." "You recorded it all?" Thomas asked, turning to me. "The threats, the extortion." I pulled out my phone, showing him the backup uploads. Every word. She threatened to release deep fake videos of me claim I'd assaulted her, even said Brad would arrange an accident if I interfered with the wedding. Thomas watched part of the video, his face growing paler with each revelation. When Madison's voice sneered about destroying us both, he shoved the phone away. "I'm going to be sick." I helped him to the restroom standing guard while he retched. When he emerged gray-faced and unsteady tears were streaming down his face. "How did I not see it?" he asked. "How did I let her fool me so completely?" "She's a professional, son. This is what she does. Janet found at least 12 victims across 5 states. You weren't weak or stupid. You were targeted specifically because you're good and trusting." We returned to find the FBI systematically interviewing guests. Brad was already in custody, sporting a spectacular broken nose, courtesy of Big Jim. The bridesmaids had lawyered up, but Marcus was singing like a canary, eager to trade information for leniency. Janet approached with her tablet, showing us feeds from the security cameras. "We've got everything. Madison discussing the con with Brad, the bridesmaids planning their roles, even footage of her practicing her pregnancy announcement in the mirror this morning." "She practiced?" Thomas whispered. "Like an actress rehearsing." "That's exactly what she is," Janet confirmed. "An actress playing whatever role gets her close to money. The loving fiancée, the grieving widow, the desperate victim, all performances." Agent Coleman returned with more questions. Thomas answered mechanically, detailing how Madison had gained access to his accounts, isolated him from friends, convinced him to take out additional life insurance. Each admission seemed to age him, the full scope of her manipulation becoming clear. "The joint accounts," he said suddenly. "She has access to everything. She could drain them right now." Robert Fitzgerald had anticipated this. "Already frozen," my lawyer assured us. "I filed emergency injunctions the moment Harold sent me this morning's video. Your assets are protected." But the emotional damage couldn't be fixed with legal documents. Thomas sat among the ruins of his wedding, surrounded by overturned chairs and trampled flowers, looking lost. The guests had been released after giving statements, trickling out in shocked clusters. Someone had forgotten to stop the reception music, and jazz standards played softly over the devastation. Rosa appeared with a cup of tea, pressing it into Thomas's hands. "Drink, mijo. You need strength." "Rosa knew," Thomas said, looking at our housekeeper. "You tried to warn me too, didn't you?" She nodded. "I hear her on the phone. See her true face when she thinks no one watches. But you were in love. Love makes us blind sometimes." Carl Morrison returned from processing the criminals. "Harold, you've got guts. Madison's already trying to flip the script, claiming you seduced her and she was just defending herself. But with all the evidence, she's looking at 25 to life. Brad's got priors, so he's facing even more. The whole network is unraveling." "What about the other victims?" I asked. "FBI's reaching out now. Turns out Madison and Brad have been running this con for almost a decade. Started with elderly marks, then evolved to younger targets with inheritance potential. Thomas was their biggest score attempt yet." Thomas flinched at being called a score. The reality of how Madison had seen him, not as a person, but as a payday, was sinking in. Marcus Whitfield was brought through in custody, and he locked eyes with Thomas. "Hey kid, for what it's worth, she fooled me too. Thought I was her partner until she cleaned out our accounts and tried to have me killed. You're lucky your old man was watching out for you." As the authorities finished processing the scene, we were finally allowed to leave. The reception hall next door sat ready with 5-tier cake champagne fountains and elegant place settings for 300 guests. Madison had spent a fortune on the perfect wedding facade. "What do I do with all this?" Thomas gestured helplessly at the reception that would never happen. "We donate the food to shelters," I decided. "The flowers go to hospitals. Something good should come from this mess." Jim and the construction crew volunteered to handle the logistics. These men who'd helped build my business rallied around my son, offering quiet support and protective presence. Madison had underestimated more than just me. She'd underestimated the loyalty of people who'd watched Thomas grow up on construction sites, who'd taught him to read blueprints and handle tools. As we prepared to leave, Agent Coleman pulled me aside. "Mr. Harrison, your recording may have saved your son's life. We found searches on Madison's computer for poisons that mimic heart attacks. She was escalating. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Not just theft or manipulation, but potential murder. I'd known Madison was dangerous, but this exceeded even my worst fears. Outside news vans were already arriving, drawn by scandal. Bride arrested at altar would make sensational headlines. I shielded Thomas as we made our way to my car, but he stopped at the door. "Everyone's going to know," he said. "My coworkers, my friends, everyone's going to know I fell for this, that I was so stupid." "You were brave," I corrected firmly. "It takes courage to love someone, to trust them with your heart. That she betrayed that trust doesn't make you weak. How you handle this, how you move forward, that's what defines you." He nodded slowly, some steel returning to his spine. My son, the one who'd built Lego cities and explained their purpose with infectious enthusiasm, was still in there under the pain and humiliation. As I drove us home, Thomas finally asked the question I'd been dreading. "How long did you know? How long were you investigating her?" "From the beginning," I admitted. "The moment I met her, something felt wrong. But Thomas, I tried to tell you, multiple times." "I know," he said quietly. "I remember now. Every warning you gave, she had an explanation for. Every piece of evidence she twisted into proof of your jealousy or control. God, Dad, I said such awful things to you." "You were protecting the woman you loved. I understand that. I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second." He broke down then, sobbing like he hadn't since Margaret's funeral. I pulled over holding my son, as he grieved not just for Madison, but for the future he'd imagined with her, the children they'd planned, the life that had been nothing but smoke and mirrors. When the tears finally stopped, we sat in silence, watching suburban traffic pass. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded miles away. "What happens now?" Thomas asked. "Now we go home," I said. "We order pizza, we start healing, and tomorrow we begin rebuilding your life piece by piece, just like construction, son. When the foundation cracks, you tear it out and build it stronger." He managed a weak smile. "With better materials this time? And much better building inspectors." I agreed. As we pulled into my driveway, I saw neighbors peeking through curtains, already aware something had happened. By tomorrow, the whole community would know. But tonight we just needed to survive. The house felt different as we entered. The security cameras I'd installed in paranoia now seemed prescient. The recorded conversations that had felt like betrayal of trust had become salvation. Every precaution I'd taken, every warning I'd given had been justified. But there was no satisfaction in being right. Only relief that my son was alive and safe, and determination to help him heal from wounds that went deeper than any physical injury. Madison had stolen more than money. She'd stolen his ability to trust, his confidence in his own judgment, his faith in love itself. Those things could be rebuilt, but it would take time. Time we now had thanks to Madison's hubris in threatening me on camera. Her greed had been her downfall, the oldest story in crime. As Thomas headed to his old room, still kept exactly as he'd left it, I poured myself a scotch and stood in Margaret's garden. The roses bloomed on, indifferent to human drama. "We saved him, Maggie," I whispered to the evening air. "Our boy is going to be okay." And for the first time in months, I truly believed it. 2 weeks after the wedding, that wasn't Thomas, moved back into his childhood room. He'd tried returning to the apartment he'd shared with Madison, but everything there carried her poison. The sheets smelled like her perfume. The walls held photos of their fabricated happiness. Even the coffee maker reminded him of the mornings she'd drugged his drinks. I found him one night sitting on his bedroom floor, surrounded by boxes of his possessions retrieved from their apartment. He held a small velvet box, the engagement ring he'd chosen with such hope. 3 carats, he said without looking up. I saved for 6 months to buy it. She said it was perfect, but I heard her on the phone later telling someone it was smaller than she'd expected. "What are you going to do with it?" He closed the box with a snap. "Sell it. Donate the money to fraud victims. Try to make something good from this mess." The full extent of Madison's deception continued to unfold. The FBI had seized her electronics, finding detailed files on dozens of potential victims. Thomas's name headed a spreadsheet calculating his net worth, projected inheritance, and psychological vulnerabilities. She'd noted his mother's death, his trusting nature, his limited relationship experience. He'd been selected like a stock investment. She had a timeline. Thomas told me over breakfast, dark circles under his eyes from another sleepless night. According to the FBI, she planned to be pregnant within 6 months, widowed within 2 years. There were bookmarks about accidental deaths and insurance payouts. The casual discussion of his planned murder chilled me. But what hurt Thomas most were the personal notes Madison had kept. Observations about his habits, his fears, his dreams, all cataloged for exploitation. She wrote that I was delightfully naive and desperately seeking maternal approval, he said, voice hollow. Every vulnerability I shared in intimate moments became a weapon in her arsenal. 3 days into his stay, Thomas made a disturbing discovery. He'd been suffering headaches and insomnia, which we'd attributed to stress. But when he accidentally took Rosa's vitamins instead of his own, the symptoms vanished. We had his medication tested. Sedatives and mood enhancers. The lab reported. Consistent with long-term manipulation tactics, low doses to increase compliance without obvious impairment. The violation of being drugged in his own home broke something in Thomas. He spent hours in the shower, as if he could wash away her touch. He threw out every meal they'd shared, every gift she'd given, every reminder of their false life together. Robert Fitzgerald visited with updates on the legal proceedings. Madison's trying to cut a deal. She's offering information on other crew members in exchange for reduced charges. But with Marcus's testimony and your evidence, she's still looking at decades behind bars. "What about the other victims?" Thomas asked. He'd become obsessed with understanding how many lives Madison had destroyed. 17 confirmed so far, Robert said gently. Elderly men mostly, but a few younger targets like yourself. 2 deaths they're reinvestigating as potential homicides. Thomas flinched. He could have been number 3, would have been if not for my intervention. The therapy started in the 2nd week. Dr. Sarah Chen specialized in victims of romantic manipulation and fraud. Thomas resisted at first, his pride wounded by needing help. But after his first session, he came home looking lighter. She explained about trauma bonding, he said. How con artists create intense emotional connections quickly. The love bombing the isolation, the intermittent reinforcement. It's like psychological addiction. He began to understand that his feelings had been real, even if Madison's weren't. That grieving the loss was normal, even healthy. That healing wasn't linear, and setbacks didn't mean failure. One evening, while I was reviewing construction plans, Thomas joined me in my study. He picked up a blueprint, running his fingers over the familiar lines. "Remember when you used to let me help with takeoffs?" he asked. "I'd count every door and window, double-checking your numbers. You found an error once, I recalled. Saved us thousands on the Mitchell project." "I miss this," he admitted. The clarity of it. Buildings are honest. They're either structurally sound or they're not. No deception, no hidden agendas. "Is that your way of asking for a job?" He looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Maybe my company's been understanding about the leave, but I can't go back there. Everyone knows what happened. They look at me with such pity." And so Thomas joined Harrison Construction as our technology consultant. It was meant to be temporary, just until he found his footing. But something unexpected happened. His software expertise revolutionized our operations. He created systems for project management, cost tracking, and client communication that brought us into the modern age. Working side by side, we rebuilt more than just business infrastructure. We rebuilt our relationship. The walls Madison had constructed between us crumbled as we collaborated on real walls and foundations. "I'm sorry," Thomas said one day, as we reviewed plans for a new commercial complex. "For pushing you away, for choosing her over you, for not trusting your judgment." "You have nothing to apologize for," I assured him. "You loved someone. That's never wrong. That she didn't deserve your love is on her, not you." The healing wasn't just emotional. Thomas threw himself into physical fitness, joining a boxing gym to work out his anger. He started cooking, taking over meal preparation with a scientist's precision. He volunteered with a financial literacy program, teaching young people to spot scams and protect their assets. "If I can prevent one person from going through what I did," he explained, "then maybe this nightmare meant something." 1 month after the wedding, Sarah knocked on my office door. Not Dr. Chen, but a different Sarah. Sarah Williams, who'd been victim number 12 in Madison's con spree. The FBI had connected them as witnesses for the upcoming trial. She was older than Thomas by 5 years, with kind eyes and a wry smile that spoke of hard-won wisdom. She'd lost her husband in Afghanistan, and Madison had targeted her during her vulnerable widowhood, posing as a grief counselor who gradually became a friend, then attempted to become a financial advisor with access to her husband's death benefits. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah told me. "For stopping her. I testified at her bail hearing and seeing her in orange instead of designer clothes. It helped. But I actually came to see Thomas, if he's willing." Thomas was hesitant, but agreed to meet. They sat in the garden, two souls bearing similar scars, and talked for 3 hours. When Sarah left, Thomas looked thoughtful rather than haunted. "She understood," he said simply. "About the shame, the self-blame, the anger at yourself for not seeing it. She didn't judge or pity. She just understood." They began meeting for coffee, comparing notes for their testimony, but also sharing their recovery journeys. It wasn't romantic, not yet. They were both too damaged for that. But it was connection, genuine and healing. The construction crew adopted Thomas completely. These tough men who'd watched him grow up now formed a protective circle around him. Big Jim taught him advanced carpentry. Miguel shared his secret to perfect concrete pours. They included him in their Friday poker games and weekend barbecues, normalizing his life with ordinary kindness. "Your boy's got good instincts," Jim told me after Thomas caught a measurement error that would have cost us thousands. "He sees patterns others miss, just needs to trust himself again." 3 months after the wedding, we got word that Madison had pled guilty to multiple charges. She'd face 25 years minimum more if the murder investigations proved fruitful. Brad got 30 years with his violent history. The network was scattered and broken. "Do you want to give a victim impact statement?" the prosecutor asked Thomas. He thought long and hard before deciding yes. He spent weeks crafting it, not for Madison, but for himself. A declaration of survival and refusal to let her theft include his future, along with his past. I watched my son slowly resurface. The trusting boy was gone forever, replaced by a man who'd learned terrible lessons about human nature. But he wasn't bitter. Cautious, yes. Wounded, certainly. But not broken. "I think about forgiveness sometimes," he told me one evening as we watched the sunset from the deck he'd helped me build 20 years ago. Not forgiving her, she doesn't deserve that. But forgiving myself for falling for it, for not seeing what you saw. "The day you stop being willing to trust and love," I said, "that's the day she really wins. Don't let her take that from you too." He nodded, processing this. "Mom would have hated her on sight, wouldn't she?" "Your mother would have been polite to her face," I corrected, while secretly planning her destruction. Margaret didn't suffer fools or threats to her family. That got a real laugh, the first I'd heard in months. The sound filled me with hope. 6 months after the wedding, Thomas officially joined Harrison Construction as Chief Technology Officer. He'd modernized our entire operation, bringing in younger clients impressed by our new digital presence. The business thrived with fresh energy. More importantly, Thomas thrived. He still had bad days, nightmares where Madison returned moments where trust felt impossible. But he had more good days. Days where he laughed with the crew, solved problems with elegant code-shared coffee with Sarah that lasted hours. "I'm thinking about building," he told me one day, showing me sketches he'd drawn. "My own place. Something I design where every space is intentional. No room for hidden agendas or false faces. Just honest architecture." We broke ground on his house 2 weeks later. The crew volunteered their weekends to help turning it into a community project. As I watched Thomas directing construction of his own future, I saw Margaret in his careful attention to detail, his insistence on quality, his vision of home as sanctuary. Madison had tried to steal everything from him. His money, his faith, his life itself. But she'd failed at the most important theft. She couldn't steal his capacity to rebuild, to trust in earned increments, to choose hope over bitterness. The foundation of his new house was solid, poured deep, and reinforced with rebar, like Thomas himself, built to withstand whatever storms might come. And this time he'd chosen his materials wisely. 1 year later, almost to the day of the aborted wedding, we sat in a federal courthouse in Atlanta. The joint trial of Madison Taylor, legally, Margaret Ann Stilton, and Brad Cooper, real name Bradley James Coleman, had drawn national attention. Cable news channels branded it the Wedding Sting Case, complete with dramatic recreations of the altar arrest. Thomas sat between Sarah Williams and me in the witness gallery. He'd gained back the weight Madison's drugs had stripped away, and his eyes held clarity instead of confusion. Sarah's presence steadied him, her hand occasionally brushing his in silent support. They weren't a couple yet, both still too cautious for labels, but something genuine grew between them. Madison entered in Shackle's orange jumpsuit, replacing white wedding dress. Prison had stripped away her polish. Without professional styling and expensive clothes, she looked ordinary, almost pitiful. But when her eyes found Thomas, the malevolence remained intact. "She's still trying to work him," Sarah murmured. "Look at her expression. She's playing victim even now." The prosecutor assistant U.S. Attorney Catherine Reeves laid out the case methodically. 17 confirmed victims over 8 years, $437,000 stolen, 2 suspicious deaths under investigation. The evidence mounted like bricks in a wall. Janet's surveillance, my recordings. Marcus Whitfield's testimony, digital forensics, showing years of planning. When Thomas took the stand, Madison leaned forward, trying to catch his eye. He looked past her, focusing on the prosecutor as he detailed their relationship. His voice remained steady, describing the manipulation, the drugging, the financial theft. "She didn't just steal money," Thomas testified. "She stole my sense of reality, made me doubt my own father, my own instincts. The psychological damage was worse than any financial loss." The defense attorney tried to paint Thomas as a scorned lover seeking revenge. Madison had coached her well, providing intimate details to embarrass him. But Thomas held firm, answering each insinuation with calm truth. "Yes, I loved her," he said when pressed. "That's what made the betrayal effective. She weaponized my trust. That's not weakness on my part, it's cruelty on hers." Sarah testified next, describing Madison's attempt to infiltrate her life while grieving her husband. Then came other victims, elderly men, too embarrassed to report the theft, initially adult children who'd watched their parents fall under Madison's spell, a widow who'd lost her husband's pension to the con. Marcus Whitfield proved the most damaging witness. In exchange for a plea deal, he detailed their operation completely. The targeting process, the psychological profiles, they built the escalation from theft to potential murder. Madison always said the perfect con was one where the mark died thinking they were loved, Marcus testified. She called it mercy killing. The victim died happy and we got everything. I testified on the third day playing my recordings for the jury. Madison's threats echoed through the courtroom, her mask finally dropped for all to see. When her voice sneered about destroying both Thomas and me, several jurors visibly recoiled. Brad's defense was simpler blame everything on Madison. His attorney painted him as a follower, manipulated like the victims. But his criminal record and the violence he'd threatened undermined any sympathy. The defense case was weak. Madison took the stand against her lawyer's advice, still believing she could charm her way free. She spun tales of abuse, poverty desperation that drove her to survival crimes. But under cross-examination, her stories collapsed. Each supposed trauma was proven false, each excuse revealed as another manipulation. You kept detailed notes on Thomas Harrison's vulnerabilities. Prosecutor Reeves pressed. Called him delightfully naive. How does that square with your claims of love? I did love him, Madison insisted, manufacturing tears. In my way, as much as I could. Your way included planning his murder within 2 years of marriage. The tears dried instantly, replaced by calculating coldness. That's speculation. Based on your own search history. Undetectable poisons. Accidental death insurance. How long before spouse can inherit? Should I continue? Madison's attorney objected, but the damage was done. The jury saw her true face, and it was monstrous. During closing arguments, Prosecutor Reeves stood before Thomas's photo from happier times. This case isn't just about money. It's about predators who see kindness as weakness, love as leverage. The defendants didn't just steal, they hunted. They destroyed lives for profit and pleasure. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Madison received 35 years federal time, no parole. Brad got 40 with his priors and violence. Their network of accomplices faced separate trials, but the organization was finished. As the verdict was read, Madison stared at Thomas with naked hatred. Then the marshals led her away, and she vanished from our lives as suddenly as she'd appeared. But this time we'd written the ending. Outside the courthouse, media swarmed. Thomas had prepared a statement wanting to reclaim his narrative from sensationalized headlines. I was targeted by professional criminals, he read. Not because I was weak, but because I was capable of love. I refused to let their actions make me less willing to trust or care. That would be letting them win. He announced the Thomas Harrison Foundation for Fraud Prevention, funded initially by selling Madison's engagement ring and supplemented by Harrison Construction. The foundation would provide resources for victims and education to prevent future cons. My father saved my life, Thomas concluded, looking at me. Not just from physical harm, but from a living death of manipulation. He risked our relationship to protect me. That's what love looks like, not Madison's performance, but steady, unwavering protection even when it's rejected. 6 months after the trial, Thomas's house stood complete. He'd designed it himself, every angle, honest, every space, purposeful. The housewarming overflowed with genuine friends, construction crew, fraud survivors from support groups, new connections built on truth. Sarah arrived with homemade cookies and a potted orchid for his kitchen. They'd been taking cooking classes together, learning to trust their instincts with spices and heat. The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone. I have something to tell you, Thomas announced during the party. I'm going back to school, getting my contractor's license. I want to build things, not just code them, create structures that shelter and protect. The crew cheered. Jim slapped him on the back hard enough to spill his beer. About time kids got the best teacher in the state. Later, as the party wound down, I found Thomas on his back deck looking at the stars. Sarah had gone home, but not before kissing his cheek, a new development that left him slightly stunned. No regrets, I asked, joining him. About Madison, no more. She was a lesson I apparently needed to learn. He paused. I regret how I treated you, how easily I let her turn me against the one person who truly had my back. Water under the bridge, son! No, it's not. You fought for me when I wouldn't fight for myself. You risked everything, our relationship, my anger, even your safety, to protect me. That's what a father does, what you've always done. We stood in comfortable silence, two men who'd weathered a storm together. In the distance, Atlanta's lights glittered like ground-level stars, each one representing lives being lived, some honest, some deceptive, all human. I'm thinking of asking Sarah on a real date, Thomas said suddenly. Not coffee or trial prep, dinner, maybe a movie. She'll say yes. How do you know? Because she sees who you really are, not the victim Madison tried to create, but the survivor you chose to become. A year later, I officiated Thomas and Sarah's wedding. Small ceremony family and genuine friends only. No country club, no 300 guests, no elaborate production. Just two people who'd learned to trust carefully, choosing to trust each other. Diana was Sarah's maid of honor, a pediatric nurse, who'd helped Sarah through her first husband's death. They'd met at grief counseling, forming a friendship that outlasted the pain. During the reception, she and Thomas talked about the Foundation's new initiative, providing support groups for children who'd lost parents to scam artists. Kids blame themselves, Diana explained. Think they should have protected their parents. Thomas's program helps them understand manipulation tactics, so they don't carry guilt for crimes they couldn't prevent. As I watched them talk, animated and passionate about helping others heal, I felt Margaret's presence. Not ghostly or mystical, just the continuation of her values through our son. He'd inherited her compassion, along with her intelligence. The Foundation grew beyond our expectations. Thomas's story had resonated nationally, putting a face on crimes often dismissed as mere fraud. Donations poured in, volunteers offered services, state legislators consulted us on elder abuse laws. We're making Madison's worst nightmare come true. Thomas told me one afternoon as we reviewed architectural plans for the Foundation's new building. Every person we help recognize a con, every family we protect, proves that she failed. She tried to destroy one family and ended up saving hundreds. Harrison Construction evolved too. Thomas's technology integration attracted younger clients while maintaining our reputation for old-school quality. He implemented profit sharing that made every crew member a stakeholder. The company Margaret and I started in our garage became a model for ethical construction practices. But the greatest construction project remained Thomas himself. Day by day, choice by choice, he rebuilt his capacity for joy. He laughed freely at Jim's terrible jokes. He competed fiercely in crew poker games. He slow danced with Sarah at company barbecues, no longer afraid of being seen as vulnerable. The nightmares faded. The hypervigilance relaxed. He still carried scars invisible but real that would never fully heal. But he wore them as proof of survival, not shame. 5 years after Madison's arrest, I retired, leaving Harrison Construction in Thomas's capable hands. At my retirement party, he gave a speech that had the tough crew wiping their eyes. My father taught me that buildings stand or fall based on their foundations, Thomas said. He made sure my foundation was solid even when I tried to build on sand. When someone tried to demolish me, that foundation held. Every beam of character he installed, every reinforcement of values, every anchor of love, they all held. He raised his glass to me. To Harold Harrison, who built more than structures, who built a family strong enough to withstand any storm. As everyone toasted, I thought about the journey from that terrible morning in the bridal suite to this celebration. The fear in Madison's eyes when she realized I wouldn't be her victim. The devastation in Thomas's face as her true nature revealed itself. The slow, difficult path to healing and justice. Madison had whispered her threats, thinking age made me weak. That isolation made Thomas vulnerable. She'd calculated every angle except one, the power of a father's love and a son's resilience. We'd won not through cleverness or revenge, but through truth, patience, and an unshakable foundation of family. Looking at Thomas now strong and whole and generous with his strength, I knew Margaret would be proud. We'd protected our boy, helped him heal, and watched him transform pain into purpose. The construction metaphors weren't just words. They were truth. When life tries to demolish you, you clear the debris and build something better. "Happy, Dad?" Thomas asked, finding me in a quiet moment. "Happier than I've been in years," I admitted. "Good, because Sarah and I have news." His grin was pure joy. "You're going to be a grandfather, due in spring." The circle completed itself. New life growing from ashes of destruction. Another generation to protect and guide and love unconditionally. Madison had tried to steal our future, but here it was more beautiful than anything she could have imagined or destroyed. I thought about that recording device still sitting in my dresser drawer, a small tool that had saved everything. But the real tools had been older instinct courage and the determination to protect what matters most. "Spring's perfect for new beginnings," I told my son. "Your mother always said so." As the party continued around us, 3 generations of Harrison's strength celebrated under the stars. We'd faced a predator and won. We'd rebuilt what she'd tried to destroy. And now we looked forward to building something new together on the unshakable foundation of family love. The greatest construction project of all. I hope my story resonated with you. Have you ever had someone threaten or manipulate you or your loved ones? How did you handle it? What would you have done in Harold's situation? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to hear more stories about family resilience and justice. Share this with someone who might need to hear that love and truth are stronger than any deception. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, when someone shows you their true colors, believe them the first time. And never apologize for protecting the people you love. Until next time, stay strong, stay aware, and keep building on solid foundations.